Oh.
Here we go. We've got the captions now. Thank you so much, Captioner.
Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. Again, my name is Matt Myrick. I am a TDI member at large, and just for self-identification purposes, I have short brown hair, tan, I wear glasses. I'm wearing a blue polo shirt that says TDI on it. Next, I will introduce Christina Duarte. Can you identify yourself?
Absolutely. My name is Christina Dewart, and I am the Director of Regulatory Affairs for InnoCaption. I have pretty long brown hair and a string of pearls, a light pink jacket, and red lipstick. I work for InnoCaption, and I am happy to be here today.
Thank you. Next will be Dr. Linda Kozma, Spytek. Can you identify yourself?
Thanks so much, Matt. Yes, hi, I'm Linda Kozma, Spytek. I'm a senior research audiologist in the Technology Access Program at Gallaudet and co-direct the Deaf and Hard of Hearing Technology Rehabilitation Engineering Research Center. I'm a woman with shoulder length, graying hair, blonde hair, and have a white shirt, necklace, and a pink jacket on. Thank you.
Awesome, thank you. And next we'll introduce Dr. Christopher Engelke, who goes by the name Cree.
Hi, everybody. I'm Cree Engelke. I'm the Director of Linguistic Research for Ultratec Incorporated. We're the makers of the caption telephone technology. I'm a man with a COVID length ponytail, blue shirt, jacket with very impressive elbow patches on it.
Awesome, thank you, Cree. Next we have our next panelist, Erik Strand, is the founder of MachineGenius. Erik, can you introduce yourself?
Sure, thanks, Matt. So I'm also a man. I also have COVID length hair. I additionally have elbow patches on my jacket. I'm the founder of MachineGenius. We are the makers of Olelo Caption Calls, which is an ASR only IP-CTS provider.
Okay. All right, well, thank you all for being here. I appreciate it. And I'm gonna go ahead and start our panel question. And then the very first question that I have for the panel, and this is the question for the entire panel. Can each of you provide the background on the work that you do? And we'll start with Christina. I'm sorry, Linda.
Sure. At the Technology Access Program, we've been doing work related to speech recognition and IP-CTS for probably 8 or so years, since around 2013 when the emergency order came out from the FCC. And so we've been doing a variety of kinds of work, some to gather consumer opinion about IP-CTS, other work has been around the user experience in terms of using IP-CTS. And I know, Matt, that there was a great presentation earlier by Larry Goldberg on ASR, but I didn't know if it made sense to maybe just mention what automatic speech recognition is at a very high level before we continue on with describing the work that we do. So if that's okay, I'm going to continue. Speech recognition is really the result of computer hardware systems and software-based techniques that are used to both identify and process the human voice. It's used for a variety of purposes. We are talking about the use for converting words a person speaks into text, but it's also used to perform actions based on instructions that are defined by a human. And it can also be used for authenticating users by their voice alone. So speech recognition has a variety of uses. We happen to be talking about one that's primarily about converting spoken word into text. And I think one thing that always interests me is the history of this and science in general, but automatic speech recognition has about a 70-year history, 70. So it's actually been around for quite a while. It's only been in the last 5+ years, I suppose, but quite recently, where we've really seen some huge leaps in the technology, primarily around the use of machine learning, artificial intelligence, big data sets, and the use of algorithms that permit learning from those big data sets. So I would say while it's been around for 70 years, we've only seen huge gains in probably the last 5 to 10 years. So I don't know, maybe someone else has something to add or to that description, or we can go on with introductions of our work.
So next would be Christine. Could you elaborate on some of the background work that you do?
Sure. So at InnoCaption, I do regulatory compliance, and I'm also in-house counsel. So I advise InnoCaption on everything legal, but we're a small company, so we all wear lots of hats. I get the opportunity a lot to work directly with users at exhibits and help out a little bit with customer support. We at InnoCaption have a hybrid method of providing captions, and as we'll get into, that can mean a lot of things, but what we do is we allow our users to choose between using stenographers or automatic speech recognition, and they can switch back and forth between a call as their accessibility needs change. So part of what I do is I also help with the testing and actually speak directly with users about this technology and get to see their feedback and what their experiences are.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. And next will be Erik. Erik, can you elaborate on some of the background work that you do?
Yeah, of course. So I was the founder of MachineGenius. We make an IP-CTS service called Audiologist calls. We were conditionally certified as the first ASR only IP-CTS provider early middle of last year. So in that regard, I appreciate TDI letting us participate on this panel. Like Cristina, and by the way, Cristina, congratulations on the award yesterday. That was awesome.
Thank you so much, Erik.
My day-to-day work, other than running the company, heavily involves interacting with our users, our customers directly, customer satisfaction, gathering user feedback, trying to turn that into innovation that makes AudiologCaption calls a better product.
Thank you, Erik. And Dr. Cree, you want to elaborate a little bit on your background?
Sure, happy to. Thank you, Erik, or Matt and Erik. So Ultratec developed the caption telephone about 20 years ago. And one of the core pieces that made that possible was the advancements in ASR, like Linda explained earlier. So CapTel, which is the Ultratec's technology for caption telephone, uses a human and ASR combination, wherein the human generally respeaks or uses the ASR to produce the captions of the speaking party at a fairly rapid pace. My research or my work in this really comes in 2 areas. The first being research, wherein I work with users. I actually do quite a bit of experimentation. We enroll volunteers, show them captions in different ways, produce captions in different ways, elicit different types of feedback from them, and spend a lot of time looking at ways to hone the measurement of their responses and look at how errors are counted and how different types of changes in the captions might influence their experiences there. And then the second part of it, like Erik was saying, the second part of what I do is the development side. We take what we've learned in the research side and the experiments and all the literature and everything else, and fold that back into our product, whether it's on the front end and something that the user sees as a feature, or in the back end is something that improves the accuracy, speed, and the like for the users overall.
Okay, awesome. Linda, looks like you have your hand up. Do you want to add anything else to this background? No?
Oh, no, sorry. If I looked that way, it was unintentional.
Okay. All right, awesome. Okay, we're going to move on to the next question. Currently, there are different technology consumers can choose from, and when opting for an IP-CTS provider, Linda, can you identify who those IP-CTS providers are?
Sure. So I think there are 7 providers, and I know, Erik, you mentioned that you're conditionally certified. All 7 providers are conditionally certified for IP-CTS, and anyone who isn't would like more information, the FCC actually has a website and that you can go to. So a page on their website about the IP-CTS providers. You can see all the names and contact information for them, and then links to their websites. But they include CaptionMate and Alelo, which are the 2 ASR only providers currently. We have Clear Caption, Hamilton Captel, Caption Call, T-Mobile, and we have InnoCaption, and Cristina described that for us. All of these services and providers use ASR to some extent. And Cree, I think you were describing a hybrid model, which can look different depending on how you implement it, but you were describing something that was traditional, where there is someone who's listening to the calling partner of the IP-CTS user, and they're revoicing into an ASR system, which is generating captions. More recently, some of those longer term providers are now getting into ASR only captioning and using both ASR and hybrid models. And of course, Cristina mentioned InnoCaption, which also has a stenographer that can be used for generating captions. So that's of course still a human, but also has an ASR only option. Some of the providers allow for people to choose whether they receive those captions via ASR only or some other method, if that's an option with that particular service. And then others will do that switching. Most recently, people have been doing it on overflow calls, but it looks like that it may be the case that some companies are moving to using it more than just for overflow calls. So there are 7 providers, as I mentioned, and just to recap, 2 that are ASR only. All providers use ASR in some form, and many of them use a hybrid model of some sort.
Very good, thank you, Linda. Can somebody from this panel elaborate more on the revoicing? Because I think our panel or audience would like to understand more about how the revoicing and the integration with using ASR with those 2 technologies together. How does that work? Cristina, Cree, anybody want to respond to that?
I'll let Cree talk since it's his technology.
I'd be happy to talk a little bit about revoicing. So when Captel was originally developed, the only way to provide ASR generated captions was to train the ASR to a particular voice. So you'd had what was called at the time speaker dependent voice recognition technology. And so individual captionists would spend quite a bit of time training the ASRs to their particular voices. They would then, as in other forms of relay, listen to the voice of the speaking party or the party who was going to be captioned, and they would repeat it word for word into an engine, a speech engine that was trained to their voice. Now we continue to use this technology along with many others that have been developed along the ways. There's a whole host of tools that have been developed both by our company and other companies I know have expanded from just pure revoicing to include all sorts of other insert mechanisms. But that is effectively how revoicing works. The person hears, the CA would hear the voice of the party to be captioned and repeat everything that's being said into a voice recognition engine that has been trained specifically to their voices.
Okay, thank you, Cree. Is there anybody else that wants to contribute to that, or is it the same throughout for all IP-CTS users experience or the technology itself?
I think for revoicing, Matt, it is the same to a certain extent with the older legacy providers that mostly operate on landline phones, like Caption Call, Clear Captions, T-Mobile, and Hamilton. Obviously, not working at those companies, I can't say exactly how their technology works, but revoicing is what they're using.
Okay. All right, great. Moving on to the next question for the panel. In your experience, what are the benefits and the weaknesses of using automatic speech recognition with IP-CTS? So I would say everyone, let's turn it over to Erik. Erik, can you elaborate on that?
Sure, thanks, Matt. So our raison d'etre for existing, that is my company, MachineGenius, and Alelo Caption Calls, the product that we produce, is the very idea that ASR can outperform human captioners in the majority of situations. I think what's fairly clear is that ASR can outperform communications assistants in terms of latency. So certainly, if ASR can produce captions on a per word basis that have a lower latency, that is time between when the word is spoken and the word appears on a user's screen or device is less than 2 seconds, that's fairly clearly better than what's achievable by communications assistants. But also, I think there's strong evidence to suggest that in the nominal case, in the baseline case for a good call, ASR actually outperforms in terms of accuracy. We've seen this evidenced in MITRE findings, in third-party findings, which is not to say that in every case, ASR will outperform the accuracy of a human communications assistant, but in many cases it does. And we get that feedback all the time. Other things that recommend ASR are privacy. So it's not just possible, but actually in fact the case, and Cristina no doubt will attest to this, that there's simply no third party on a call when you work with ASR, at least the way our systems are constructed. So even though there is a cloud-based ASR provider on our calls, there's not anyone listening to the call. And in fact, those cloud-based ASR providers are prohibited via their own privacy policies from saving any of that information or from using any of that information. And of course, we internally don't have any access to what's happening on those calls. Again, by policy. With software, anything is possible, but in a commitment to meeting the FCC regulations, of course, we have no visibility into anything that's said on any call. Other things that confer ASR are availability. So there's no reason at times of high throughput to have to wait on a CA to be available. So ASR is always available. It's more or less infinitely scalable. And likewise on long calls where the FCC regulations permit switching out CAs every 10 minutes, an ASR-based call can just continue indefinitely, which is actually really helpful for a very specific class of calls like unfortunately waiting on hold for Social Security or COVID checks, things like that. It turns out to be very useful. But in fairness, we should talk about weaknesses. And Larry earlier, I think outlined this very well. When there are heavy accent issues or background noise issues or other call quality issues where the signal of the call is harder to distinguish from the noise, yeah, for sure. A human can transcribe that, can caption that better than ASR today. That being said, there are advances being made, and forgive me for running long on this, but it does cover a lot of ground. I watched a lecture online that said, for background noise on phone calls, there are only about 160 noises that people care about. And ASR engines can figure out what those are. And we're moving in that direction so that nonverbal cues about what's happening on a call can actually be communicated on the call. And likewise, there's a certain amount of trust that has to be established among folks who are used to someone actively transcribing a call versus a machine doing it. And we understand that some of the hesitancy to use ASR for these purposes is based on, I'm not really sure it works. So I think those are the two key weaknesses.
Okay.
And thanks, Matt, for letting me run a bit long.
Oh, thank you, Eric. Next, Linda, what can you elaborate on some of the benefits of and the weaknesses of ASR with IP-CTS?
Well, I certainly concur with what Eric has said with regard to benefit. I'm also thinking about the concept of being able to do multi-language translation. I think that ASR has the potential for being hugely beneficial in that area. Many providers do English, Spanish, IP-CTS, but there are many, many other languages. And I think that that's one place where ASR could potentially be hugely beneficial. Certainly, I guess the other thing that I also think about is that currently the captions are provided to the person who has hearing loss who's using the service, but there may be some ways to, provide captions to maybe the hearing person to be able to even monitor what those captions are. I think that's much more likely to happen when you have something like ASR and a machine-driven system. Certainly the issues around weaknesses of ASR are the same that people have in some respect, speaker characteristics, as Eric mentioned, when you don't have clear speech or rate of speech that's too fast, or you maybe in some case have some overlapping speech because there's someone speaking in the background, accented speech, all of those things can be problematic. But I think the difference is that, the machines are learning all the time and they're pretty good at learning. And not only are they good at learning, but they're pretty consistent in the results that they produce. And I think that consistency and reliability with ASR and machine learning is something that is important. And Eric, I was really interested in your comment about trust. And mostly because this issue is not something that's specific to automatic speech recognition in terms of gaining trust. It's simply that humans judge mistakes made by algorithms more harshly than they judge human mistakes. And you can see that in a whole variety of areas, medical technology, giving directions, all of those sorts of things. So we have sort of this human bias that occurs against algorithms. And so the more experience we get with those things, the more trust will be gained. There are always going to be edge cases. And Cree, you mentioned initially how ASR was speaker dependent, and we're gaining much more speaker independence. So we don't have that issue at nearly to the same degree, but there are still those edge cases where you have people who have maybe speech that's not typical, and there's definitely work going on in that area for gaining data about those other types of accents or speech characteristics, and the machines are demonstrating pretty amazing results, in my opinion. So it's interesting. It's going to be, I think, fascinating to see over the next few years what happens with ASR. Thanks.
Thanks, Linda. All right, next we have Cristina. Cristina, can you elaborate?
Sure, I concur with what everybody said. With automatic speech recognition, where it works really well. It's fast, it can be accurate, but it depends so much on the speaker. And, you know, so I had here things that both Erik and Linda hit: the speed, that it's verbatim, the consistency. Where ASR sometimes falls short is inclusivity of speech patterns. I am the child of two individuals who are profoundly hard of hearing, and my voice, because I grew up being told to enunciate my words and speak clearly, my voice processes wonderfully on automatic speech recognition. My captions are fast and they're great. Now you have my dad, who is born in Portugal and born with a profound hearing loss, and ASR gets so lost, sometimes those captions are embarrassing. Actually, the way that InnoCaption developed our hybrid switching feature was our co-CEO, Joe, was testing the platform before we put it to market, and he made a call to an airline. The beginning part of the call was really great because it was a computerized system. Computers understand computers. And after a significant hold, he was transferred to a representative who, for one reason or another's voice didn't mesh well with automatic speech recognition, rendering the captions useless. And in that moment, he was in a situation where he could either ask a third party for help on the call, which, as we all know, renders accessible technology useless for that particular call, or, you know, hang up, disconnect, and start the whole call over again. And that was where the idea for this in-call switch was born, for lack of a better term, because he had that experience. And I've had the opportunity to test out automatic speech recognition, and a lot of the time I think I'm getting pretty good at hearing somebody's voice and being able to put money down and say, nah, this person's going to process well, or this person won't. About 6 months ago, I did have a little bit of a surprise where I would have lost money if I was betting money. And it was a presenter over a webinar who had a really clear voice. Female speaker, men's voices tend to process better, but you know, her voice was very, very clear, kind of like mine. And I had the captions on, and I was very confused as to why her captions were not good. And then I realized she was nervous, so her voice was shaking. And I guess the automatic speech recognition platform didn't recognize what was going on. So don't get me wrong. Yeah, there are weaknesses, but it is a great technology. And as Linda was saying with other languages, when I saw CaptionMate and Olelo coming into the market with automatic speech recognition only, I got very excited because there are whole segments of the deaf and hard of hearing community that are still stuck back where my parents were in 1992 with me answering the phone. I still remember, Dwight's residence, Christina, how can I help you? And that was just, you know, how my parents took their calls. But people who don't speak English in the United States are still stuck in that position where they're having to rely on other people, and ASR just creates these wonderful possibilities for other segments of the community, and, you know, all segments of the community, because again, as Erik and Linda were saying, it is incredibly fast. So I'm very excited for the possibilities. And with that, you know, I'll hand it back to you, Matt.
Yeah, that's great examples here, Christina. And Cree, what can you elaborate on?
Gosh, I'm trying to think if there's something for me to say that hasn't been said. I feel like all the thunder's been stolen. I mean, you guys have made some great points, right? I mean, you know, the speed, the low latency is terrific. I think the capacity, the general capacity for high volume call traffic is unrivaled. I mean, obviously it's nearly infinite, right? I think, you know, high accuracy under ideal conditions is uncontested. To Christina's point, yeah, if you speak perfect SAE, I mean, look, I love it. I'm the most unmarked category because, I mean, like Christina, I speak white, middle-aged, middle-class, male, able-bodied, middle America educated English. I mean, it's just ASRs eat it up. And the further you get away from that model, the more trouble you tend to have. And I think, you know, this has been documented in all sorts of studies. And Larry talked about this in the last session. And actually, you know, that I guess that brings up another issue for me, just with respect to Linda, what you were talking about in terms of reliability and consistency, and Eric, what you were talking about in terms of the testing that's been done here. And so I make the distinction with consistency of saying, if you play the same audio to something, are you going to get the same text output? Versus reliability, meaning if you play 100 different voices in 100 different contexts, what do you do with all those different outputs then? And my concern, coming back to this question, I guess that what I'm saying is that the consistency is a double-edged sword. If you play voices in and you test and train ASRs on voices like mine and Christina's and Eric's and Linda's, and you end up with a particular model of speech that it does extremely well on, you're priming it to not do as well on voices that are different. And what you end up with then is the potential for a systemized process of ageism, racism, sexism, ableism, regionalism, whatever sort of isms, whatever you're not testing and you're not teaching toward, you have the potential to bring about. Whereas if you have other systems, the variety may allow you to switch in and out of it. So Eric brought up a great point. If you're sitting on hold for hours and hours, having a consistent service that you can learn the ins and out of, I think can be a very powerful tool. But knowing that if you need to cycle out of that, you need to go to something else. Having a variety of different models to choose from is important as well. And again, to Linda's point, these are things that are evolving. I'm not going to sit here and say this is not a moving target. This isn't something that's continually getting better. So I don't want to come down harshly for or against. I think there are pros and cons, and on both sides, they're really important. And so maybe I just did a great job of summarizing all of your points, guys.
That's great. Okay, thank you, Chris. So the next question I have for the panel here is, this is a question for Christina and Eric. And could you tell me a little bit about the privacy and the confidentiality of a call content when it comes to ASR with IP-CTS?
Sure, and I see Eric pointing at me, so I'll go ahead and take it. You know, I want to start out by saying that when we originally released ASR, we got so many emails from users who were very concerned, because I think when people think about ASR, they automatically immediately think of machine learning and your information being stored in the cloud, and then what happens to that. And luckily, with just like all IP-CTS services, confidentiality is key. We're all regulated. We are not allowed to keep transcripts beyond the duration of a call. So I know for us, and we have it publicly on the record that we use Google with our own proprietary tweaks, we pay more to ensure that no machine learning happens on the call. And I assume that other ASR providers have these kinds of options. So while yes, ASR does machine learn, it doesn't happen on IP-CTS calls. These platforms do it in other ways. So it is 100% confidential and private. So users don't have to worry about that. Again, we are regulated. Erik, is there anything that you want to add to that?
I just add the following. So I'll reiterate that it's 100% private. No one has any access to what happens on any conversation, including our ASI provider. I will say also that in my experience from working with our users, they almost don't care about machine learning. They really just care about how effective is this. And that's far and away the feedback we get. Occasionally, we get someone who asks, you know, how is this being generated? But equally often, we have consumers say, oh, ASR tends to perform a little better, right? Are you using ASR or CAs? Without real regard for privacy. So although we are regulated by it, and although there are other ways for the DNN, right, the deep neural net that ultimately performs the ASR to train itself or to get trained, users really just care about what's effective. And like many online services, again, everyone here is 100% compliant with privacy. They really just want it to be effective, even if they were to say, privacy doesn't matter that much to me, just make it as accurate as possible. That's my experience.
And, you know, and Erik, I wonder if that's been the experience that you had, because being an ASR only provider, obviously you and I have had this discussion that as an ASR only provider, the choice is inherent, because people seeking out your platform, they want to use an ASR only service. I feel like maybe the reactions that we get in the emails that I field are because our user base is more gearing towards that, wanting the stenographers and the ASR, and then trying to figure out, because their baseline was human assisted and they understood it, what that meant for their privacy. So, you know, I do think that both of our experiences very much are demonstrative of different segments of the community and how they feel. I'm just trying to explain why maybe Erik is seeing a little bit of a different reaction from the consumers he deals with, as opposed to the ones that I hear from.
And if you don't mind, Matt, just let me echo that. I think Christina's right. You know, one of the things that I'm pretty sure Cristina and I agree on is that consumer choice is paramount here, and let the user decide what works best for them. And yes, of course, we promote ourselves as ASR only. So of course, we're going to find people that are more attracted to that kind of service. And likewise, people that want a hybrid service or stenographers might gravitate to InnoCaption. That makes sense.
Okay, wonderful. All right, because of timing, you know, we're going to move on to the next question. I'm going to split this up into two groups, just because we have, you know, two people that focus on the areas of research, and the other ones are, you know, more of consumer-facing providers. So the first question that I have is for Cree and Linda. How are researchers evaluating the quality of ASR captioning? So, Cree.
Thank you. Sure. So, as I said, we do quite a bit of research in this domain for both, you know, to make sure that we're providing users with the best possible services, but also we do quite a bit of research that we share publicly in terms of how to negotiate and study these things. And this is something that actually Larry kind of kicked off his presentation with, so I'll start with that. So one of the big things we look at is, how do you measure the weight of an error? There's been a lot of discussion about this in different areas to say, well, so let me start off by saying that accuracy is actually really a discussion of errors, and which seems silly because it's kind of the inverse of accuracies. But what you're counting is how many times the ASR got it wrong. So one of the biggest things we look at is what makes an error wrong and what's the impact of that error on the person using the system. So for example, if I were to say, I'm going to go to the store today, and the captions came out, I'm going to go to the store today, you're likely to read right over that and have no problem. However, if I say, I'm going to go to the store today and the captions come out, I'm going to hippopotamus, hippopotamus, you're probably going to say, what? And that's going to change the direction of our conversation. Likewise, if I say, I'm going to go to the store today and the captions come out, I'm going to go outdoors today, you're going to read that and it's going to look and feel and smell and everything about it is going to look correct. And it's going to change the rest of our conversation. But the captions are going to look perfectly right. And we're going to have to figure out what happened and what went wrong. Now, Linda brought up a really interesting and excellent point here, which is that we tend to judge some types of errors more harshly. And as Larry brought up, there are certain words that some ASRs really like to insert that are at times comical and at other times really, really problematic. And I'm talking about the no-no word list, right? But if you look at the ways that so many ASRs are trained, these things will come up more and more regularly than maybe we're anticipating. So all this is to say, we spend a lot of time looking at the impact of the errors, how they influence the conversation, what they do to the architecture of the interaction, what they do to the structure of the interaction, and how do people deal with them, and what does that do to their experience of the telephone call. And then we actually work backwards from that and try to develop tools for this. So we've been involved in a number of projects that are not just ours. They're not just focused on developing them for us. We've been working with the Joint Providers Group now for about 3 years, helping them develop what I think is probably going to be the most robust research on IP-CTS captioning that's ever been done when it's completed. And I don't want to say that we're the only ones who've been doing research here. I mean, this draws on the expertise of the 5 providers who had been certified up until that point when we started the group. So we do that sort of work. We also look at delay the same way. We look at what are the different impacts of delay in terms of how is it measured and what are the impacts that it has on the interaction. And then finally, of course, we do the sorts of research that everybody does, measuring objective speed and accuracy across all these different ASRs so that we can actually get a lay of the land and say, well, this is the one we want to use and this is how we want to tweak it or what tools we want to apply to it.
Thank you, Chris. Linda?
Sure. So at Gallaudet, we do much of the same kind of research that Cree described. I'm glad you focused on accuracy, Cree, because I was wanting to talk a little bit about latency. So I'm glad to have the opportunity to sort of go in that direction. And much of our work, we have a subcontract under MITRE, so a lot of the work is under an NDA. But that being said, we've recently done some work where we looked at conversations between hearing calling partners. And I think the thing that struck me the most about the analysis of those, and it is completely consistent with what's more generally in the literature, is the degree of interactivity that occurs in those conversations. So we do things like look at how long a turn lasts and how long of a time there is between the end of one turn and the beginning of another. And it turns out when we looked at hearing calling partners, there was a lot of overlap. In some cases, no time between the end of one turn, the beginning of another. And on average, that time difference was less than 500 milliseconds. So it just gives you an indication of the level of interactivity that occurs that can be, that level of interactivity can be supported in ways with ASR where maybe the delay is on the order of 1.5 seconds compared to something that might be longer. So I think part of our work, which I find really interesting, is looking at other types of telephone calls, and between hearing calling partners is one area that we've looked into and I think has informed us and made us think about latency in ways that we might not have otherwise if we hadn't done that particular type of work. So that was revealing for me. And I do think, you know, in terms of functional equivalence, that it's an important piece as well. Thanks.
Thank you for that insight. Next, you know, we're going to go to Erik and Cristina. You know, as providers, how do you evaluate the quality of ASR captioning?
Erik, would you like to go first?
Sure. Thanks, Christina. So to an extent, we do exactly the same kind of research that Linda and Creed do. Certainly not in the same depth that they take it to. You know, both Christina and our company and every company that offers an ASR only solution for IP-CTS right now evaluates the range of ASR providers that are on the market. And I'm pretty sure that none of these IP-CTS providers do their speech recognition in-house, with very good reason, which is like, let's leave people who are really good at this stuff to do their work. And let's take from the best of them and incorporate it into our offerings. And so, you know, we go through exercises periodically, and there was an initial exercise before we launched our offering in the middle of last year to say, okay, which is the best of these ASR offerings? And that included latency and accuracy, and to some extent, although not a scientific extent, the importance of inaccuracies. However, we feel very, very confident that we have chosen the best ASR provider that is available. And so what we do today is we listen to customers. So we actively ask customers who live in groups that we have asked specifically to give us feedback, and also to customers that are just sending us random feedback, if you will, about I had trouble on this kind of call. On the other hand, this is great. And that's the principal way that I think commercially we need to advance the ball in terms of what we offer. So, you know, we've as commercial entities, I know Cree and Linda do serious academic work, but as commercial entities that are offering a product to the world, what we're doing is listening to customers the most and saying, what's working for you, what's not working for you. In our experience, and this is not fictional, our customers, again, who may be self-selecting based on the fact that we are an ASR only provider, think it's overwhelmingly better for them. I mean, it's very rare that we get a complaint or a question about the quality of the speech recognition. They may say they have gone out of signal range or they have bad audio quality, but very rarely is it a problem with the actual captioning, the accuracy of the captioning. And that's our principal mechanism right now for making things better, is listening to the users.
And to echo what Erik is saying about listening to users, I fully agree with him. I think it's really important that we are listening to the community and the individuals that are benefiting from this service. Research like Cree's and Linda's is absolutely irreplaceable and important to understand on a more complex level. And for us, what we do is focus on what our user experience is. We do the test calls, obviously, and monitor the quality of ASR, not only our solution, but other on-market solutions, to make sure that we are offering the best one, that as far as we believe. And our users have the opportunity at the end of each call to submit a 5-star rating. And we use these internally to be able to kind of monitor, depending on if it's CA or ASR, and watch for trends and see how people are liking it. If they're rating the calls high, if they're rating them lower. And like Erik, we also have users who provide us feedback they're very generous with their time. They use our services and let us know where we can do better or what worked really well for them. And I think as long as we continue listening to the consumers and driving our development in the direction that they want, you know, the future looks very bright. So yeah, that is how we monitor our quality.
Thank you for sharing that. It was very good. We are almost at the top of the hour and we're at the very last question. The last question is for everybody. What does the future hold for ASR and captioning? Anybody want to answer that?
Bree, why don't you go?
Go ahead, Eric.
Thank you. Sure, I'll kick off here. Again, you know, we've been in the business of using ASRs in some capacity for a very long time. And, you know, as Linda said, ASRs have been around a lot longer, but it's only recently that we've really seen this big jump in technology. And I remember actually 20 years ago when CapTel was introduced, being asked, well, how long are you still going to need a CA? Are you just trying to replace all the interpreters, all the CAs? Are you getting rid of everybody? You know, just moving to a purely automated system. And I remember the answer came up with was something like, well, look, it's definitely ASRs aren't good enough for all the time right now. Because remember, we're not just captioning the perfect calls. We're not just captioning the best environments. Our job is to caption everything all the time and to do the best possible job whenever possible. Or best possible job at all times, rather. So we said, no, it's definitely not ready yet. It's going to be 5 years. And 5 years later, someone asked the same question. We said, yeah, it's not ready. It's going to be 5 years. And as Linda said, well, okay, now it's getting better and better and better the closer we get to now. And it's always 5 years. Next year is 5 years. Next year is 5 years. And then all of a sudden, we started seeing these tremendous advancements. I mean, genuinely tremendous advancements in ASR. And we see a real, I don't know, a step progress here. And it's things kind of accelerated dramatically. And you see the, you know, big engines coming into the market. And, you know, like everybody on this panel and probably most of the people watching us, you know, I've played with all of them and I've played with them in, you know, tons of conditions. We have thousands of hours of test scripts that we use to evaluate ASRs. And I can tell you that when they work great, they work really, really great. And when they don't, well, that makes me say in the next 5 years, you know, we're going to see something really amazing.
Thank you, Chris. Anybody else want to add to that last question? What's the future hold for ASR captioning?
Sure, I'll go next. I hope that the future holds more inclusivity for different speech patterns, people who have accents, and it becomes more encompassing so people can reliably know if they're using ASR only, no matter who they're calling, they'll be able to get a quality service. I hope that the accuracy of different languages improves. We are very lucky on staff to have individuals who their first language is Korean and individuals who their first language is Portuguese. And so we've gotten to test a little when it comes to other languages and automatic speech recognition. And we know that depending on the language, sometimes it's very, very hit or miss. So further development to enable, as I mentioned in a previous question, different sectors of the community to be able to benefit from this technology as well. I know we're running out of time, so I'll kick it over to Eric quickly.
Linda, let me kick it to you first.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's okay. It's okay. You know, I was actually looking at the Q&A and box, and Dana has an interesting question that relates to this idea of other kinds of information that we can get from speech patterns and speech. Like, you know, somebody being sarcastic. And certainly that's not something that ASR does now. And, you know, maybe even humans don't do particularly well or recognize sometimes, but that direction of being able to do other types of recognition, we've already talked about, dogs barking or other aspects of sound that are informative during a conversation, and even to what Dane is talking about with regard to maybe intent of the speaker, maybe things that are in the future that we can look forward to. There's always the question of how do you indicate that kind of speaker intent, for example, sarcasm, when you're doing that transcription, and particularly at that rate. So it's hard to know where we might go, but that certainly could be one area that we see some breakthrough in. I totally agree with Cristina, this idea of being more and more inclusive of what sometimes are called edge cases and making them less so that more people are included in the ability to use and make use of ASR is important. So I think, my personal opinion is we are only going to see things get better. And personally, I'm sort of excited to see that happen. I will just mention, Eric, if you don't mind, the other question and answer, which I think is a good point that's made about people who are combining both the auditory and the visual signal together. And that's a really important point because people weight those two signals differently and make use of captions differently depending on how much they rely on auditory information. I think it's an area that's really ripe for exploration, and having a better understanding of how people with different amounts of auditory capability make use of captions is something I don't see very much of in terms of exploration, but absolutely is important. And I think it might be a bit because some of the things that might help us understand that a little better, like maybe eye tracking, is something that's not easy to do or easy to interpret, but it's definitely an area that deserves exploration. Eric, back to you. I know it's 4 o'clock. Sorry.
Matt, if you don't mind, in 30 seconds, I just want to echo something you said, which is what I was going to say. My vision or hope for the future is that wherever there is an auditory or voice interface, there's an accessible interface that works for people who are hard of hearing or deafblind or whatever modality they need to communicate from. And I was going to, again, say what you said, which is some of that technology will be on the provider end, and some of it will be worn on the user themselves, right? Whether it's cochlear implants or some kind of fancy glasses that transcribe everything they say, it's going to be a continuum and a meeting of what is offered by providers of these services and interfaces and what is local to the customer. I mean, I think that's where I see the future.
Okay, wow. That's all I can say. You guys have been a great panel. I want to thank you for the full hour. I'm sorry we don't have any available time for Q&A. But, again, this has been a very great panel. So I want to thank everybody, and you all have a great day. Okay.
Thank you, Matt.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Matt.
Bye.
Bye-bye.